Hello, everybody. This is Coach Stephanie, and I have Dr. Johnathan Edwards on again. We've talked before about fat adaptation and cycling and nutrition, carbs, strategic carbs, and that sort of thing. But this time, did we do an interview on your running too, the run form? I can't
Yeah,
remember.
we did on my book, The Science of the Marathon that I wrote with Veronique Balat, French physiologist. Yeah, we went all into that and the
Yeah, that was
polarized training for marathons and all that. Yep.
yes, that's a great book. And I think if you're interested in upping your running, I think that and you're a triathlete and you want to be a better runner, or a cyclist. Why am I saying cyclist? If
Yeah.
you are a
Better runner
triathlete
for
or a
sure. Yeah.
runner, then this is the book for you, because it talks a lot
Yeah.
about how under 4 hour marathon, and that variable speed
The
running.
2 hour marathon and variable speed
Oh,
running. Yeah. Yeah.
that's oh my
Right.
gosh, I'm messing up everything, Johnathan. Like it was,
Four.
I knew
Well,
it
no,
was.
there's 4 hour marathons, that's for sure. No, but
Yeah, there's a
I just had a guy in Kona. He did the he kind of that's what got him through was just the kind of polar, the polarized running. He's doing kind of off on, and that got him to the finish despite having a bad gastro upset.
Oh,
So.
really? Yeah. I think that it's naturally a lot of people run like that. It's just that
Well,
now if you have the mindset like, oh, this is just under or just over a threshold, or like you can keep the pace higher. But we'll that's not what we're going to talk about today, because we're
right.
talking about a subject that really hits home to me. We're going to talk about depression and different therapies for depression. Johnathan just wrote a book about the
Oh,
ketamine, what
the revolutionary ketamine.
the
Yeah.
revolutionary ketamine and depression. And I'll share that my son's best friend, when he was in high school, committed suicide, and it was devastating. It still chokes me up. It still affects my son, and this is 10 years later. His mother still, not completely recovered from it, and it's so devastating to have someone you love and care about and you see in your life. He was at our house all the time, gone because of suicide. So I think it's a very important message. Before Johnathan and I started, before recording, we were talking about athletes using ketamine and the UCI rules and that sort of thing. So we're going to go into it. So if you want to talk about your background with ketamine, and why did you want to write this book?
Many reasons. Thanks for asking that. So I'm a board certified anesthesiologist. So I've been using ketamine, as a medication in hospitals and on patients for, nearly 25 years. And in the last, I'd say 5 to 6 years, I've gotten interested in the mental space, and how I was always interested in suicide because I was exposed to suicide, from a very young age. My grandfather took his life when I was just 7 years old. Native, well, at least he was born on a reservation, and he was part Indian, and he got put on oxygen, and that was it. He just he just committed suicide with a gun and done. So, I was exposed to it very young, and that always stuck with me all throughout school. And I've always been very interested just in mental health, and nutrition in general. So if you look at who wrote the foreword, one of the things that got me to write the book, Gavin de Becker, he wrote A Gift of Fear. So he's been on Oprah many times, and he had a treatment for a women's shelter, and many of the women, he would pay for the treatments, and yeah, he approached me about writing this kind of book, and I was like, wow, I was, he said he'd write the forward if I wrote the book, and it's kind of how it happened. So anyways, it came to, before this, I wrote a book on kind of the lockdowns called Suicide, COVID-19, and Ketamine. And this book it's published by Skyhorse Publishing, subsidiary of Simon and Schuster. And it really goes into, the mental health space. The first chapters go into the history of it, but then there's a chapter dedicated to first responders and veterans, another chapter dedicated to adolescents, another chapter dedicated to, like, what is a psychedelic treatment? Like, what is it? What could it be like? You can't know what it would be like unless you've, although near-death experiences and things like that we can get into later, have a little bit of that. So anyway, going back, to your friend, and it's there's nothing that quells, that trauma from a mother. And if you could just somehow see the signs, would you do a psychedelic? Would you do ketamine? Would you, and there are studies of kids. I actually did a whole podcast just on adolescents and ketamine for suicidality and mental health. And it's not everybody's going to say yes, but there are some who are going to say, I'm at least going to give it a try. I'm going to see if it fits into the treatment, and if it makes sense. It's definitely not a panacea, but it's one tool people should know about. And I'll finish with that. That's what the book's about. You should know about it at least, and you should know how to bring it up with your psychiatrist or psychologist or whoever you're working with, if it's an option or not. And and that's the genesis of the book, basically.
Well, I think it's as a parent, and thankfully that my children are pretty happy and not suicidal, but there were moments when they were depressed and in despair, and it crossed my mind. I think as a parent, that is really the worst nightmare. You have one daughter?
Yes, I have an 11-year-old daughter. Yep. And she's in school here in France, and learning French. She's
exciting.
She's done several years here in French school now, so she's pretty into it. So it's bilingual, and it's good.
Very cool. But if you saw that she was depressed, you're like, a parent who loves their child, that would not, I can't imagine.
Well, I try to do the traditional ways first,
right, of course.
Yeah, and then just go through at least get therapy, and go through the right channels. But the most things, you can look at yourself as a parent and go, okay, what else can I do? Before there were psychologists and psychiatrists, you change your kid's environment, for example. Do that. That's kind of the nuclear option. When especially when it comes to these, like trans ideology, your kid comes home and changes genders or whatever, those kinds of things. I mean, you may be all right. Some people are okay with that, but let's say you're not. The only way to change, like, from suicidality, severe mental depression, is a change of environment, because that gets the child out of that environment, with therapy, of course. And that's kind of, some psychiatrists note that as the nuclear option. And of course, that's out of reach for probably most of the population, unfortunately.
Right. It's not like many people can't just pick up and move to a different town, a different part of the country, or even a different
part of the country. Yeah.
So
or a different country.
Or a different country. How did you, because you're an anesthesiologist, I did not know this until I read part of your book, that that's what they use ketamine for traditionally, is to.
Yeah, it's a human anesthetic. It was used as a buddy drug in Vietnam, and that's how it got pushed through the FDA so well. But it's lo and behold, like it's glad you asked, because in chapter 2, I kind of go into the history, and it's a fun history to tell. We knew ketamine and its derivatives were antidepressants before the late 90s, when the Yale researchers brought it all out. And if you read, there's a paper by Edward Domino. He's a pharmacologist, and he was running a clinic basically for what was called phencyclidine and ketamine abusers back in the 70s. And this woman, he wrote it out, and he said, why do you abuse? Why do you need to keep taking ketamine? And he goes, oh. And you've stopped taking your antidepressants. And he goes, oh, that's simple, doctor. Ketamine works way better than my antidepressants. Why should I stop? So
yeah, good answer.
That was in the 70s. And so that's a prelude. And it wasn't until the late 90s that the Yale researchers kind of started testing it. It kind of made its first headway into eating disorders. If you remember the whole anorexia crises, right, and all that, it in Britain, there were some studies on it, and that clued some people in, and many researchers kind of knew all along, I think, and then they just finally pulled the trigger, to, hey, let's do proper research studies on this. And I mean, now it's gone all the way from eating disorders and depression to it stops suicide. Yeah.
Yeah. And so do you know, I have never used ketamine or taken ketamine. I do see a therapist, and she does offer ketamine, but I don't feel like I'm that depressed. So it's like,
exactly.
I'm a happy person. So
you are, I know. Well, that's why you run and cycle though, right?
Yes. Yeah. I do run, cycle, and swim. Surprisingly, like, my swim is now better than my running and cycling. I haven't talked to you in a while. I slipped a disc in my back early in the pandemic, and it was a mess. I was a mess for like 3 years, and finally I'm moving again, but I have arthritis in the knee, and I'm like, actually, I probably could have used ketamine then, because it was really going from doing all kinds of things to not being able to get out of bed, or it was painful to walk from like my bedroom to the bathroom. It put me in a pretty deep depression.
Wow.
But
sounds like it sounds like you dealt with it, but that's what as an endurance athlete, you have the tools to deal with it, and I mean, that's, as a coach, that's part of it. I mean, how probably a lot of your clientele, you don't even know it, is depressed at some time or another, but little did we know, I mean, endurance sports is one of the best medicines for mental illness, period. It always has been. So
whenever you go out, start a bike ride, and you have all these worries and angst, by the time you're done, all the problems have gone away.
Well, I mean, what do you do when you're in the hurt box? You go back to your traumas, right?
Yeah.
A lot of your traumas come back up when you're truly in that hurt box, climbing at, whatever, 170, 80, 90, 200 beats a minute, whenever that is, and you're just going at it. And I mean, you just kind of come out of your head, in some instances, at least, when I was racing Cat 1 cycling and all that, I had plenty of I'd call it, out of body experiences, really. I mean, you're just like, just going, and, and then afterwards you're so relaxed, so there's definitely things that go on there. And we know, like, things like, like the mTOR proteins and the brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, and many other things are switched on during exercise. And when you have mental illness, all these things, these proteins are low in the brain. And with psychedelics, it also increases some of those proteins, just to get in a little bit of the biology of it. And it just on, to try to keep it on the topic of exercise and mental health. When you're constantly running and, like giving yourself dopamine and all that kind of thing, dopamine actually is a trauma response. So there's many authors who have written about it that way. And that's, as that's the endorphins and the dopamine rush. And it can also be overdosed as well. And in a chapter 7, where I talk about athletes' mental illness and suicide, I actually talk about this in one of my pro cyclists, Johnathan Cantwell. Pro cyclists, pro runners, pro athlete, anything, what are they looking for? That next dopamine hit. Where do those dopamine hits come from? Getting a PR, winning a race, getting a contract, I don't know, or getting, some privilege that you have as a professional athlete. And you're living from dopamine rush to dopamine rush. There's, to be fair, there are a lot of fair and balanced athletes. But, I've experienced hundreds of pro athletes in my day. And a pro athlete who is making their living, they are going from dopamine hit to dopamine hit. And it's, that has its own issues. And you got to wonder, it does increase, you do see suicide, especially after, I saw it personally in 3 of my ex-cyclists, and one of them, and Johnathan did kill himself. And that whole story, that story is in the book. And there was more to the story than what than all of that, of course. But anyway, I highlight, being a pro athlete comes with those kinds of situations. And those are some of the realities that do happen. And that's something, these things were, I experienced them, right in front of me. So, it was looking back, it's not a shock to hear that he committed suicide now, but if I'd known what I know now back then, I think I would have had a better idea what was going on. So it's it's unfortunate, but that's another reason I wrote the book. I can hopefully help somebody else in front of me.
Yeah, to look for the signs. I mean, I think that the young man, my son's friend, he had some stress at the time, but I don't think anyone thought he was suicidal. He had gotten his girlfriend pregnant, and who was 15, and he was 15, and she had a baby, and it was just overwhelming for him. And then and so that was a catalyst, but I don't know that anyone thought he was actually suicidal.
Right. Yeah. And a kid, it's not easy, and I mean, just to tell you how the lockdowns really accentuated suicidality in kids, I write about another with the adolescent chapter about 18 school-age children, all as far as to my knowledge, were not in and out of mental illness centers and things like that. Pretty normal kids. And when you read about some of them, they're clearly regular students, not a history of cutting and, other things, and which is not a sign of suicide, by the way. We can get more into that. But think about it. During the lockdowns in 1 year, 18 kids figured out how to kill themselves, mostly from a school-issued iPad.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So that kind of stuff, it didn't really make the news. And then, but I have it all in the book, and you got to ask yourself, how could have those parents somehow just, like you said, could have they noticed something else, or at least got educated on the signs and symptoms? And this is where your intuition is so important. If your intuition's telling you things of this sort, there's a reason it is, and it's very powerful, you know. And I've learned a lot about this from Gavin de Becker and his writings. You know, he writes a lot about intuition and the gift of fear. If you have a
I think
school age child, this is a must read for especially a girl growing up. It is a must read. It is that important. So
I'll put it in the notes, the show notes,
yeah,
the gift of
yeah,
fear,
for sure.
because
Yeah.
I read a book a long time. I read a lot of books, and I may have read this one before. Survival. I don't. Maybe not.
Yeah,
I'll
they
have
are.
to check
They're
it out.
no, it is. It's about using your intuition to basically bolster your survival skills. And it's about it's learning how to listen to your intuition. And it's a big, you know, you're in the elevator with somebody, you know, do you decide to get in or not? You know, get out of a movie, are you being followed? What's rational, what's not? You know, those kinds of things, you know. And the rationale, learning to be rational is what protects you there. And you do things without even knowing it. Anyway, it comes back, you know, let's bring it back to the intuition. And I think when you're dealing with a kid, you know, and I am not a psychiatrist, although, you know, I do have certificates from UNLV with the psychiatrist I work with. He's on the staff, and I've been basically working with Dr. Sam Zand. He's out of the Calm Clinic. And so I basically, you know, been in the thick of it for many years now. So I see exactly what goes on and what's said and how to say it. And it's a lot, you know. And it's been pretty cool just to see the genesis. And I never thought I'd use learn this much psychiatry. You know, but I'm happy I did. You know, definitely helped me write the book and understand what I was doing a lot better. But so anyway, that's how I know a lot about the psychology of all this.
So, and then going back to the ketamine. So you've been using ketamine as a doctor for many years because you're an anesthesiologist. And then I remember you talking about, I don't know if it's from another interview or the book, because it's been a while. I know you sent me the book, but I didn't have a chance to read it all. But some of it was really familiar, so I suspect I may have read it before. But how did you jump into hey, ketamine? You were talking in either the interview or the book about ketamine when people would come back from the treatment of using ketamine for surgery or something like that you noticed different things about people who were revived after using it.
So yeah, once if you do a ketamine treatment, it's basically an experience in your own head, you know. And to put it, I guess in another way, for you and I to have this conversation, we are blocking out tons of sensory information. You know, there's so much sensory information out beyond us that you don't even realize that we're blocking out automatically. And one of the the theories of psychedelics is that basically the floodgates open for the sensory experiences, and that's what gives the classic signs of psychedelic, you loss of time, dissolution of the ego. You may see people, you may go back to experiences. And I guess an easy way to say what's in a ketamine experience, sometimes they're terrible, but sometimes they're beautiful. I'd say most times they're beautiful if the patient is prepped in the right way. However, that being said, when you're coming in for like, psychiatric purposes, think about being able to face your traumas safely. And that's in a sense what really good therapy does, or also, a psychedelic can do that as well. I think, for what I've seen and experienced, good therapists can really put you in that place where you feel safe to confront your traumas. And usually it's who knows, abuse, or sometimes it can stem from a lot of things. I mean, I got pages of them, so like anyway.
Yeah, there's lots of things. I mean, there's lots of things to navigate this world that are traumatic.
Right.
I mean, you can be in a car accident, you can be in a bike crash. They
Oh,
have
yeah, we all have traumas of bike crashes, and I mean, that's a good one, because you get in a bike crash, I mean, that's a violent event, that you had no control over. And so, there's a lot of control issues, and whether you're going to get back on the bike or not, those kinds of things. And what a psychedelic treatment basically does, whether it be ketamine's the one we use right now because it's available and legal. You can go to a clinic and get it. You can't go everywhere and get ayahuasca, psilocybin, MDMA. Those are not medicines you can be prescribed right now. In some trials you can. In Oregon, you can go get it yourself, but that's it. I think there might be another state.
Boulder, I think. Boulder,
Boulder, Colorado. Yeah. But I don't think all of Colorado.
No, it's just, I think, Boulder County, or that one. It's one area. Yeah.
So when you get out of the psychedelic treatment, you're more amenable to the therapy. Your brain's, in a sense, it's primed. It's a good priming tool. Now you're ready to kind of talk about, and that's what I tell people. Think about, oh, can I just get the ketamine and not do the therapy? And I say, absolutely not. That's why, and this is why I insist on working with a psychiatrist. I'm not, there's a lot of doctors out there who can just give ketamine without therapy, and they just say, oh, get therapy on your own. I don't think that's the right way to go about it. I think you need to do psychedelics and whatever it is, and usually the ketamine, and get the therapy in and around those sessions. Not you don't have to do it right after, but within a day or whatever it is. Just your mind is much more open to dealing with those traumas that are giving, resulting or helping to result in those mental illnesses, such as, just depression, and all the way to suicidality.
Yeah. And so talking about like athletes using ketamine, that
Yes.
they're it's not listed as a tool for doping. Talk little bit about that. So talk about the rules for using ketamine, and some examples that you were telling me before we started recording of athletes who have used ketamine, either positive or not so positive.
Yep. Mostly, I'll say it. So the whole chapter, chapter 7, athletes, the mental illness and suicide, goes into many MMA fighters, Dean Lister. There's a couple other NFL guys who've used ketamine. But the whole depression thing, first of all, it's just to say, I mean, I start off the story with Michael Phelps. He got pretty down in the weeds for the longest time. Oh, I can't show that I'm weak, that I'm depressed. And yeah, he got in a pretty dark place when you start reading the studies.
Especially if you're, I know personally, I've been focused in training on an event like Ironman or something like that, and it's such a big deal to me, that it consumed all of my headspace, like, because you're training, you're worried about what to eat during training. Did I get my workout in? Did I get my workout in as prescribed? Did I get to bed on time? Did I sleep? But then after the event, like, you have all that headspace. There's no goal to work for. And then all the little things in life that
Right.
start to creep back in. So I can see easily how it can be depressing. I mean, when I injured my back, I was training for Ironman Coeur d'Alene, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, there's no way I can catch up on this training. I was in pain, and it's like crazy stuff goes through your head, or through my head. I'm not saying through, but I can see how after the Olympics and winning all those gold medals, it's easy to sink into a depression, because
Well,
like
it goes
what
into,
yeah,
what we discussed, the
yeah,
dopamine
yeah,
hit. Where's that next dopamine hit coming from? Is that the whole story? I don't know. I mean, I've never talked to Mr. Phelps, but I could be pretty certain that's some part of it at least. So anyway, in athletes, the many athletes have done psychedelics. I mean, Aaron Rodgers famously did ayahuasca. You have Lamar Odom. He's a basketball player. He did ketamine and other things for his addictions. You also have let's see, Dean Lister. I mean, I read about a whole slew of them in here, who have done psychedelics, and many have done ketamine, and mostly with good experiences, and the argument is like, okay, if you deal with your traumas, is that what's holding you back from your best performances? Or is it, like the discussion, like, we were talking about with the UFC fighter, Misha Tate, is that actually going to hinder you? Are you taking away some of that flame that burns you to train at that elite level? I think I've been thinking about this for a while, and I think it's individual, that's for sure. I mean, if you grew up with gangs and you got guns held to your head, I don't know, or you watched your dad shoot up, or who knows, just really traumatic things, like really bad things. Just I can't imagine that getting some therapy, and if you have to do something like a psychedelic like ketamine, wouldn't help. Now, that all being said, it just depends on what level of trauma you're trying to deal with, and every case is individual. There's no blanket statement you can make, but every case is certainly individual. So it's hard to say who will do well with it, and who might not do well with it. You might not get, it might hinder your performance in a sense. And that goes into the question about, the world, anti-doping agencies. It's actually, they don't really have anything on it. It's permitted in and out of competition. I'm sure that'll change. I mean, there's zero chance you could compete. Like, people can compete, people can compete on marijuana, I guess, doing the, some of the mountain biking, the extreme mountain biking stuff. But I don't care. I don't care what level of ketamine you're on. Good luck with that. It's not going to go well. So maybe that's why, I don't know. But any of those psychedelics that put you out of your headspace, in a sense, it doesn't go. It does not go with competition. There's just no way. So
yeah, I have a little experience with psychedelics a long time ago, and I cannot imagine trying to even walking a block would have been.
Well, that being said, though, there is a story about Doc Ellis. He was a San Diego Padres pitcher, and he was doing LSD and amphetamines, all at that, and then
oh my,
and there's a whole story. I wrote it in the book, and he didn't know he didn't know he was going to get like called to, he thought it was a day after and something. So he gets called up and, hey, you got a game today. And lo and behold, he threw a no-hitter that day.
Oh,
He said, you know, he looked at the batters and some of them were different, just, I don't know, different shapes. And
so it wasn't a microdose; it was a full.
yeah, no, but so maybe
Oh,
LSD has a different thing. I don't know.
I don't know.
But
I've never tried LSD. I don't.
yeah, I don't know what LSD does either, but personally. So yeah, it's hard to say though, but it goes into that whole thing is like, LSD was big in the 60s, and I kind of bring this, back up in the book, and a lot of it, a pretty cool thing, that was, I thought I got out of the book was, when I wrote it, was that, almost 50 to 60 years of psychedelic research was taken away, by the government,
Right.
because if you remember, like, like the Harvard professor, Timothy O'Leary,
Right.
he, he said, he famously said, tune in, tune out, it was like tune in, tune out, get out kind of thing. And it, I think the government looked at that, and people, thought people were going to change into communists, all this kind of thing. And so they just put the kibosh on all psychedelic research at that time in the 60s. And then it wasn't until now, basically this last decade, that the psychedelic research has really come on. And I think there's something about like Jordan Peterson. I've met Jordan Peterson, and he was extremely interested in the book. So we'll see where that goes. You never know. That would be a neat deal to talk to him more about it. But he said he ironically had Timothy Leary's exact same post at Harvard as a psychologist.
Oh,
And he
really?
said,
That's pretty interesting.
and his motto, he changed Leary's motto into tune in, turn on, and grow up.
That's
So,
it's sort of funny. It's like that post might be like in Harry Potter, the dark arts professor. Nobody ever stays
oh,
there.
right. Yeah, that's
So,
true. Yeah, that's
so
there's a,
that's
it helps you face the snakes in your heart, as getting in a little Peterson kind of stuff in there. But it's I think there's a great future for it. I mean, if you want to find out more information like about PTSD, just go to Johns Hopkins. You'll see like phase 3 trials there. At Yale, and Lori Calabrese, she's a psychiatrist on the East Coast who's done wonderful studies with suicidal patients in an outpatient basis. And basically, I mean, almost none of them committed suicide after like 3 to 6 treatments.
I've read the
Yeah.
Johns Hopkins study about end of life people with terminal cancer and psilocybin, and
Yes.
the
Yep.
results that they had, which were amazing. They had nuns who said it was the most profound experience they've ever had.
Right? Yeah. And those people
so
are trying to put themselves in that space every day through prayer and all that, right?
right, through
So,
prayer and meditation.
well, get this. There's even some, if you go back in the church history, and there's evidence of this, they actually used to put psychedelics in the host or in the wine.
Yeah, did you read the
I mean,
Immortality Key?
yeah, exactly. That's where I read that. And that
Yeah.
he went through it. I forgot the author's name, but he's on Joe Rogan. And anyway,
It was,
yeah.
but I think it's interesting. So, one of the reasons, the premise in the book was that they stopped with the psychedelics in the wine because the soldiers did not want to fight in the Roman war, did not want to be Roman soldiers. And something that's interesting that psychedelics and marijuana were pushed down and made illegal during the Vietnam War because the soldiers did not want to go to
Right.
Vietnam. They're draft dodgers.
That is awesome information, because look, you have, you have a handle on that information from growing up with it. That's awesome, because, how many kids can't even relate to that, right? So that's awesome. Brian Moruscu is the author of the Immortality Key.
It's a great book. I've read it a couple times because I just think it's interesting. But I wonder if have you read Civilized to Death? You know that book?
I know, I've heard of it. I've not read it.
And it's about the premise of like the reason why people are so depressed and so much fear is because we're not living like humans were supposed to live. It's the guy who, like, they used to live in small bands. There's lots of different psychedelic traditions all around the world. Right. I grew up outside of Silver City, New Mexico, and they have the Mimbres Indians there. I just found this out that a lot of their pottery is based on scenes from has the moth that goes to the Datura leaf. So Datura is a psychedelic flower and plant, and so even the Mimbres were using psychedelics back in the day, and so there's a culture of using that. I'll look.
So there's it's in my book, and I gotta find it. The last leader of the Comanche tribe, there in their church, they use psychedelics, and that was one of the reasons they kept their church separate. Is because that's how they did it. And I mean, the American Indians, there's a saying, the white man go to church to pray to God. The Indians go in their teepee to talk to God.
Yeah.
So it's
they have they have a lot of here in the Southwest. It's what is it called?
Peyote and mescaline.
Peyote, peyote, mescaline. They have. I was like, why can't I think of that? But I know people have sat in peyote circles. They're pretty strict though. You have to sit there like from sunset to sunrise, and you're not allowed to move. You can't move. No. And you have to women have to have their wrists covered, your whole body covered, your wrist and your ankles. And it's very proper. So it's
they got hundreds and maybe thousands of years doing it. So you never know.
Yeah. Christopher Ryan wrote Civilized to Death.
Okay. Yeah, I'm gonna get on that. Yeah, that's a good book.
It's one of my favorites. So I've read that a couple times. Sex at Dawn is another book written by Christopher Ryan. So I don't know if you know this. I used to be an archaeologist. Like that's what my degree was.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what I went to school for. And I was like actually like an archaeologist. And then I had kids and I was like, oh my gosh, this is not a good job for a mother. I was leaving. I had to leave town all the time and camp out and stuff like that.
Right.
But and then how that translates to endurance coaching. Actually, I think the nutrition part and like living like what's natural for the body to do, I think relates to anthropology and archaeology. But I'm still, even though not an archaeologist anymore, I love these books about history and how like how did humans really live? Like the human, the animal, like instead of human, this I think sometimes like we get away from the fact that we are just really part of the animal kingdom, and what's natural for an animal as opposed to natural for this industrial world that we live in. But some of
Right.
the things I like about Civilized to Death is like he talks about that like, these small bands who use, there's all kinds of different cultures of psychedelics use, and living in small groups where everybody knew everybody else. It's just quite a different ceremony, different situation that you live. Like I live in a house and I know my neighbors, but I don't know them well. I don't know like, them well enough. Like I could just walk across like
Yeah, that's a
the
special
street.
thing. To have really good neighbors is that's a special situation nowadays.
Right. And people who live in these giant apartment complexes and they maybe know 5 people. I mean, it's just like there's this like, this thing with loneliness and isolation, and circling back to endurance sports. I think that's one of the reasons people love it, is that there's like, that's where you see your friends and there's these people you can count on, and you train with
Well,
someone and you
it's
get to,
yeah. Well,
it's
it's where you reach higher levels, right? You reach goals through play. And that's so important. I mean, there's not many situations where you can attain a higher goal. We're all looking up, right? As humans, that's what we do compared to, say, other animals. We look up, we look like whatever that is for you. And sports help you achieve that in play. And, if you lose the ability to play, you basically lost the ability to be human. And I'm pretty sure you can attest to that just looking through archaeology sites. I mean, there was always, most of it was play, not hunting,
yeah, well, even hunting's play. I
Yeah,
mean,
even
I don't
hunting
know.
is play. Exactly. Yeah.
So my son and I,
Right.
we go hunting. We put in for hunting licenses, and that's exciting to even get drawn. You're picking out your unit that you're going to go hunt in. We got drawn for deer and sandhill crane.
Okay.
So, and then we got the units that we want. But anybody who's gone hunting, like that's fun. It's like
Yeah,
hiking and
there's a connection about it, right? It's
yeah. And then like if you harvest an animal, my son got an elk last year,
oh,
and yeah,
elk
and so
liver was the best gift I ever got ever.
if I get another one, I'll save some for you, Johnathan.
Please, please.
So this year I'll be venison liver, but and elk heart. We got save the heart, the liver, and then
Wow. Oh, that's
and
great.
actually right now I have liver in the pot liver. I have elk meat in the crock pot. So but it's like then you get to eat off of that. For an elk lasts a long time. That was last October and we're still eating elk. So
That's how, isn't that's how it's supposed to be, right?
yeah, I mean, and it's the whole scenario is thrilling. Like even the processing of the animal, especially if groups of people are doing it together.
Yeah.
And it's like we're so removed. Like no person is supposed to be sitting in a desk in front of a computer doing this all, typing away. Like that's like so unnatural for what an
We were
animal.
programmed to do. Yep.
Right. Like I mean, even just squatting down, like I because my knees messed up now, but like just to squat is hard for me. And like that's how people used to sit for hours all day, is like squatting on the ground. They don't have the low back problems and the hamstring issues and the poor ankle mobility that we do now. And all that's just from sitting at a desk.
Right, right. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. But that's what I like about Christopher Ryan's book. He's like, all these things we think are great developments. Some of it is talking about viruses that the swine flu. Well, swines weren't domesticated and they weren't like kept in small quarters where the viruses would mutate, and so tuberculosis, and he goes
Right.
through a lot of it.
That's all close quarter stuff, right? Huh?
Right. Or even I don't know if you've read what's his name? The guy who wrote Protein Powder, Mike Eads, talks
Mike Eads,
about.
yeah. I know Mike now. Yeah.
Oh, he's cool. Yeah,
Yeah,
well,
yeah,
I
great
have not
guy.
met him I have not met him personally.
Yeah, I met
But
him.
I love his talks, and I
Yeah, yeah.
like his book. But like this and I can tell you, when I was an archaeologist, like the people who were still hunter-gatherers, they were healthier, their bones looked better, they were taller. And then once they switched to agriculture, it was this process of shrinking, their bones were more deteriorated.
Yeah,
You know,
you're
their
talking
teeth
about
looked
you're talking about the Kentucky site, aren't you?
yeah.
There's a Kentucky site that where the
That they
two
were still
groups
hunters.
they're hunters on not far from each other.
No,
Either
on
apparently.
one side
And
of
it
the
was
mountain, and
obvious.
on the one side of the
Yeah.
mountain and one side and the other side of the mountain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it's
I geeked out on that one day. It was good.
yeah, I love that. And it's just like this idea of like, I feel like sometimes we've gotten so far away from like just moving as a human, like moving like and living a human life. And I think psychedelics have been a part of that humanity. If you read, what's his name? The guy, Terrence McKenna. Have you read the stoned ape theory?
Yep.
He thinks the reason we evolved was because of psychedelics, like following the herds of animals.
Yeah, I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard all that. That's who knows? You know, who knows? I mean, he's got a point. I mean, you can't, you know, there's no, you know, he's a fascinating guy to listen to and read about for sure. I read all of his or a lot of his stuff for the book, and actually some of his stuff is in the second to last chapter about what is a psychedelic experience. He comes up with one of the best ways of explaining it. Yeah.
Oh, I have not read that. I will have to check it out. Well, we're coming up on time, and I don't want to take up all your time, but I hope people are totally geeking out on all this stuff. Like we are. I'll definitely have links to Johnathan's book. And so this book, and also the Gift of Fear. So the Revolutionary Ketamine.
Ketamine.
Yeah. How a little known drug can cure depression, prevent suicide. I think that's super important. I'll have a link to that book. The Gift of Fear and Survival Signals. I'm totally interested in that book.
That's that's a great read. Great read. So. And
then Civilized to Death. And if you have questions for Johnathan, please send them to me or put them in the notes. I'll put a link to Johnathan's website. If you want to check out his website, he does coaching. And I don't know if you're still doing.
Yeah, I'm coaching here and there, just here and there. I mean.
And do you do the blood panels or any of that anymore?
Yeah, I check a lot of blood panels. That's what I do a lot nowadays, do blood panels for athletes, and a lot of injury management. Like I'm doing some French techniques called surface mesotherapy for back pain and knee pains and stuff, which I'm writing. That's going to be my next book that I have coming out, and that's with a guy named Dr. Gez in Nice. And that's one of the reasons I'm here, actually. And we're putting that together right now, and that should be an interesting thing, and it'll probably be the topic of our next talk.
Cool, very cool. And then also variable speed running. I'll put the link to that because I thought that was a very good.
Yeah, billatraining.com. Yep.
Yep. Although I did try to go and get her little formula, and it was all in French, and I couldn't read it. And the little translation didn't work.
They gotta work on that one. So anyway, but it's good stuff. So,
thank you so much, Johnathan. All right. I'm just gonna stop the recording.